Hello and happy Thursday. I'm Hannah Maswani. I'm the Director of Mission and Equity Consulting with YWCA McLean County. And for this week's Think About It Thursday, we're keeping it traditionally nerdy, and I'd like to chat a little bit about the word woke and the history of the word woke. Chances are you've been online even a little bit in the last 5 to 6 years, and so you've likely heard this term used either as sort of a badge of honor of I'm woke and I get it, or perhaps used as sort of an accusation of the woke police or, people participating in the woke Olympics. This word has had a couple of different meanings throughout the years, but it's all about how it's used. And so before we get to that stage of this evening's programming, let's go to our good friend Merriam-Webster, who defines woke as someone who is aware or actively attentive to issues of social justice, political tensions. The Guardian and various other sources pretty much land on the term woke as meaning racially conscious or aware of racial bias or systemic bias, right? This word, as I've shared, has been around for a long little while. It's actually been around for a little over 200 years. A Google study released in 2019 showed that according to different written records and memories of oral traditions, the word woke has been used since about 1819, although it did peak in 2016, again, when it was one of the words of the year. We've seen it used a lot in sort of political discourse, and again, meaning somebody who's socially justice-oriented, what have you. You may be surprised to know that this word has kind of had a consistent-ish meaning for at least the last 100 or so years. The first time the word woke was used in popular culture was by Leadbelly, aka Huddy William Ledbetter, who is a fantastic folk blues singer, songwriter, and musician. He wrote a classic hit in 1938 about the Scottsboro Boys. For those of you who are not familiar with it, this heart-wrenching tune talks about the 9 black men and children. One of the accused was only 12 years old, but the 9 black folks who were falsely accused of raping 2 young women. Since 1938, since the song, since their conviction, it has been proven by one of the women who accused them that this assault never happened. However, 8 of the 9 men were executed, spent their lives on death row, what have you. His song, Leadbelly's song, speaks about the fact that black men in particular need to stay woke and keep their eyes open because, as we've seen in a history of the mistreatment of black men in America and black folks in America, he advises everybody be a little bit careful where you go along. So stay woke, keep your eyes open. And it was actually Leadbelly's song that sort of popularized or made known the Scottsboro Boys in a way that hadn't really been publicly spoken about before. Just 10 years or so after, or actually just a couple of years after, J. Saunders Redding, who was the first Black Ivy League professor, spoke on behalf of the American United Mine Workers and said that waking up is a damn sight harder than going to sleep, but we'll stay wake up for longer. So the idea of when folks were petitioning for their rights, it's easy to sort of let things go. It's easy to be complacent and not self-advocate. So here's another instance of being woke, being attentive to the systems that are going on. With the civil rights movement, we see woke take on even new levels of popularity. So Times Magazine published an article by the Black novelist William Melvin Kelly that says, if you're woke, you dig it. And it's this idea of calling out white beatniks for appropriating Black language. So we've all heard about appropriation. We've heard about how Black folks really lead popular culture in terms of music, vocab, just life in general, right? And so this isn't a new thing that we're seeing, whether it's with lip injections or fake tans or what have you. But even in the 1960s, William Melvin Kelly accused folks like Kerouac of sort of stealing their language in an effort to be cool. We also see folks like Malcolm X, so central figures to the civil rights movement, talk about you have to wake people up and then you get action. So again, to be woke isn't just to literally not be asleep, it's to be active in the pursuit of one's justice, one's freedom, and of dismantling oppression wherever you see it. This continues on. James Baldwin famously said in 1961 that to be a Negro or to be Black in America is to be in a state of rage almost all of the time, right? So James Baldwin, being a queer Black man and activist and phenomenal writer, talks about the fact that if you're even a little bit aware that you have to be invested in the cause of your people and the cause of other people's, So we see woke kind of really taking shape as this term that's really not dissimilar to the way we use it now, right? In Garvey Lives, one of the first Black run, Black produced, Black written plays in America, he talks about he's going to stay woke. He's going to help other Black folks. And so we see this word not just applied to individuals who are staying current on issues that might affect them, but using it as sort of a rallying cry to help other folks. Fast forward a little bit to the 2000s and we see the fantastic Erykah Badu. She has a song, Master Teacher, in which she talks about fighting this paradigm, fighting the white supremacist norm, right? And so in it, she says that she's searching for a new freedom. What if there were a lack of racism? What if people were allowed to be who they were? And so in this, she's actively dreaming of a brighter future, right? And you're more than welcome to check out either one of her volumes of New America. The song Master Teacher was actually written by another phenomenal, or co-written rather, by another phenomenal Black artist, Georgia Ann Mildrew. And she writes about woke as being a uniquely Black experience. And to sort of go back to the reference in the 1960s, sort of this critique by Melville of white folks or non-Black folks, even like myself, right, appropriating the word woke when it has historically, as you can tell by everyone who's really said it, has been about the Black experience, has been fighting this sort of double consciousness, sort of tapping into this idea that you're in a system that doesn't treat you fairly, right? And she speaks about being woke as not merely, again, being awake, but being sort of almost beaten into this knowledge of this isn't right. We're not being treated fairly, right? You have being aware of one's struggle, but not only one's own struggle, but the struggles of one's ancestors, and then how to get involved in that sort of fight or that pursuit for justice. With even more sort of activist codings, we see the Black Lives Matter movement use this word, encouraging folks to stay woke. This was in response in Minneapolis, in St. Louis, in response to just two, for example, of the many, many murders of Black men, whether it's Michael Brown or Jamar Clark, who were teenagers, who were young adults who were needlessly shot, right? Behind them, you can see a map of police violence that is just the last couple of years as well. So the Black Lives Matter movement, using the word woke, which has such an intrinsic, significant meaning to Black folks as we think about their rights, as we think about a more equitable future, we see it really come into the mainstream, right? So going back to 1938, with Lead Belly, seeing it sort of spark a movement and awareness about the Scottsboro Boys, seeing it with Erykah Badu, seeing it now with the Black Lives Matter movement. And you can buy any number of shirts or what have you, or signage that has stay woke, stay aware, stay active in the pursuit of your own liberation and freedom, and to do so with an awareness of the many lives that were lost as we work towards these goals. There is one other meaning of the word woke that sometimes gets a little bit overlooked, and that is to be aware of infidelity. So it's kind of two sides or two shades of a different coin, so to speak. So the idea that you're being cheated on either by a romantic other or you're being cheated by an entire system, right? So you've probably heard the classic by Childish Gambino asking folks to stay woke because, you know, you're getting cheated. You're having folks wandering around you up to no good. And so woke has these two meanings. One of your partner perhaps being romantically not quite loyal, but then also the larger idea of being aware of systemic injustice, which again, we see with Meek Mill more recently in his song Stay Woke. Most notably his lyrics of "You gotta feel me, feel like the system trying to kill me." So again, this is a greater story being told, one more akin to Lead Belly, one more akin to Erykah Badu and James Baldwin, right? So there's these two different ways the word's being used, but it's always coming from this sense of I need to be aware of what's happening around me because I need and I deserve better. The notion of wokeness was also very present in the film Get Out. The idea that we're not in the quote unquote sunken place that you see here. We're not sort of drinking the Kool-Aid, or in the instance of the movie, the tea, right? That is keeping us complicit or passive in our own oppression, excuse me. So to be woke is to reject complacency. It's to sort of take a stand and to take action. However, we already talked about the ways that the word woke has been appropriated in the 60s. It's no different today, right? So we see a lot of what is known as woke washing by different corporations, whether that's in the form of pink washing, which here with the Bank of America, right? So different corporations or entities or celebrities who come out in favor of whether it's LGBTQ rights or Black rights, but who maybe aren't walking the walk as much as they perhaps talk the talk. So some key examples of this are the Kylie Jenner and Pepsi campaign, where, you know, it seemed that just a can of Pepsi stopped insurgents, stopped police violence. And while there's this sort of virtue signaling for a future that we do want, while we see companies like Fashion Nova and Nike claim to be empowering to Black women, looking into their practices, you see that Nike hadn't quite offered maternity leave at the time that this came out, or we're seeing that Fashion Nova does have some really unfortunate predatory practices, or does not perhaps live up to being feminist in ways that it might claim to do. Same thing for different companies that purport to believe that Black Lives Matter, whether it's on an ad slogan or what have you, but maybe not necessarily in what they do. And again, I, of course, encourage folks to look into the different organizations that they see, or whether it's musicians, what have you, to see the folks who do signal that they are indeed woke, and to sort of think about, what does that mean? What does that mean as something tangible? Or is it perhaps not? Two scholars, one of whom, Rebecca Solnit, who wrote the great book Men Explain Things to Me, described woke as being kidnapped and dead. And I do want to own the fact that I'm citing two white women here as we talk about the word woke, because woke has, in a sense, as a word, as a concept, been kidnapped by non-Black communities and used to describe any range or any sort of array of social justice knowledge, right? So I'm woke to what's going on, like nothing can fool me. And this sort of critique, right? So because the word woke has been whitewashed and diluted, it's often now used as an attacking label, in the same way that we see things like snowflake being used from an earlier Think About It Thursday, or the same way that we see some folks talk about the PC police. We're also seeing that now with folks who are too woke to effectively get anything done. And it's also, again, one of those phrases like snowflake, like PC, like social justice warrior, warrior, maybe also warriors, that's used to create division and stop conversation from happening. So it's kind of a flag. It's more of a comment on the style versus the substance of what someone is about, right? And further than that, we've seen the term woke become a bit of a joke. For anyone who watches SNL, I encourage you to check out their Levi's Wokes commercial, which is sort of a parody, a satiric take on a lot of buzzwords like trigger to sort of make fun of things. And going back to the more Childish Gambino use of the word woke, we'll see a lot of sort of petty memes like the one that you see on the left-hand side of your screen. But I do want to be clear that when we're talking about the ways that woke is or is not used, and the ways that woke is used as sort of a negative label for folks who are invested in discussing social justice to whatever degree, it's not necessarily just a partisan issue, right? So we see a Democratic commenter, James Carville, who frequently equates the notion of somebody being woke as being stupid or inflexible. So regardless of political affiliation, we see this term kind of equally used as sort of a badge of honor, or to accuse someone of perhaps not being actionable, right? So you might be woke in your words, but that might be too far removed from actual progress. So throughout the history of the use of the word woke, starting out originally to describe Black consciousness and the investment of Black lives, pursuing a greater, more equitable, anti-racist future, it's sort of this word that's kind of fizzled a little bit, and now is more, again, a comment on style than substance, because it's one of those sort of catch-all words that you can use the same sentence but mean a lot of different things. If I say that you're woke, if you don't know me, is that a compliment? Am I calling you a little bit too out there? But before we get too sort of caught up in the depressing fact that words can have lots of meaning, or alternatively no meaning, to bring it back to one of its original senses, the idea that to be woke is to remain invested in fighting towards social justice. So a phenomenal sociologist, Marcelina Morgan, writes that wokeness is a rejection of remaining cool in the face of oppression, right? So whether that oppression is something that has happened to you personally or something that is systemic, it means that you are explicit in regarding this injustice, whether it's racism or sexism, and you are working towards dismantling that. So I think I can comfortably say YWCA, with our mission of being empowering women and eliminating racism, it's a pretty woke call to action, right? And so, as with any virtue signaling or any sort of claim that one might make to being invested in social justice, striving to do that with not just our words, but also our actions. So that has been our Think About It Thursday this week on what it is to be woke and the history thereof of woke. I encourage you to, you can like and subscribe. You can hit up some of the comments and say different ways that you might have seen the word used. And as always, please feel free to reach out with questions or requests for future content.